In this video, we're going to show you how to install an airbag spring helper kit on your Toyota Tacoma. This will be located behind the rear wheels. Let's get started. Using a 21mm socket, remove the 6 lug nuts. Remove the wheel. We're going to cut our existing bump stop as flush as we can. We want it at least under these carriage bolts. Using a cutting tool, we're going to remove the bump stop. Now that we're about halfway through, we're going to use a pry bar, slightly lift up, see if we can separate the rubber at all. Remove the old bump stop. Do the same thing on the other side. We're going to put together our air spring assemblies. Remove that top cap. Grab the bottom bracket. We're going to install this to the air spring. Install the 3/8 hex bolt. We'll be using the short one this time. Using a 9/16 wrench. We're going to snug down this bolt. We're not going to make it tight. We still want this bracket to move around. Install the top bracket. Install the nylon nut. Using a 24mm socket, we're going to snug down our nylon nut. Make sure this top nylon nut is nice and snug. We're going to grab our 90-degree air fitting. We're going to grab the supplied Teflon tape. We're going to wrap this around the bottom threads of the air fitting. You want to wrap this the opposite way that it'll be threaded in so that the tape doesn't come off as you're threading it. Put 1 or 2 wraps. Get the extra tape off of the bottom. Then we're going to thread it into our airbag. Get the air fitting nice and snug. We can always tighten this down later if needed. The airbag for the left side is ready to go onto the truck now. We're going to put the right side together on the bench. Putting together the right side airbag. The only difference in this assembly is the added heat shield. We're going to put this down before putting on our top bracket. Making sure that top bracket is sitting in that dimple. Install that nylon nut. Before fully snugging this nut down, be sure that your heat shield is in the correct position. When you put this on the car, you're going to want the heat shield facing directly against the exhaust. I'm going to leave this nut slightly loose, just in case I need to make a slight modification, but we're going to get it mostly tight. Install the air fitting. Be sure you have that Teflon tape on it. We're going to dry fit our left spring assembly onto the vehicle. You want to get this lined up on your leaf spring. Make sure that the bolts are sitting right in the middle. Just like that. We're going to want this bracket to line up with this bump stop bracket. This will be slightly pulled backwards. We want to get this mostly flush with this. Then we're going to make a mark on our airbag that corresponds to our plate. Remove the assembly. We're going to line up our marks, and we're going to flip it over, and we're going to tighten the bolt. Make sure your marks stay in line as you tighten this bolt. Get it nice and snug. Install the assembly back into the car. We're going to install the bracket to the top bracket. Get the bolt started. Get the nut on the back side. Using a 9/16 wrench and a 14mm socket, we're going to snug down this nut. Don't get it fully tight. You want it to still be able to move around so we can line up our other bolts. Just get it nice and close. Do the same thing on the other side. Install the assembly up to the bump stop bracket. Install a washer onto the big bolt. Install it through the bracket. We're going to install a washer, crush washer, and then nut onto the back side. Install the second set of bolts. You may have to tap the front of the bracket to help these line up. Snug down the rear bolts. Holding the nut with a wrench, go around and snug down all 4 bolts until they're tight. Install the pinch plate. Install the bolt. Install the nut on the back side. We're going to line up the 2 brackets. Get the bolt installed and the nut started on the back. Snug down the pinch bolts. Using 2 29mm sockets, we're going to snug down our nut. We have the right side assembly installed. We have all of the bolts tight up top and the one on bottom to the airbag. We also have our heat shield positioned against the exhaust. We're going to route our lines for the airbags. We're going to start at the back of the vehicle. That's where we're going to put our air fittings. So we're going to run our lines through the frame, away from the exhaust. And get it up to the front airbag. We're going to install the sleeve onto the airline. We're going to put the airline through the bracket and then install it onto the fitting. Install the airline into the fitting, pull back on it, give it a good tug, make sure it's locked in. Ours is good. I'm going to pull that sleeve up around these brackets and where it is close to the exhaust. We're going to take apart our air fitting for the rear, take off the tire cap, remove the nut. We're going to use our bumper as our mounting point. We're going to stick it through, put up the supplied washer, install the nut, we're going to measure out how long it'll be with our air hose to that fitting. I'm going to go through this little slot in the bumper over to the fitting. You always want to give yourself just a little extra, so we'll probably cut ours right about here. I'm going to use an airline cutter. It has a razor blade in the middle. This will give you a nice straight cut. Measure twice, cut once. Install the line into the fitting. Pull it back up. Make sure it's got a good bite. We're going to use a cable tie to tie up our airline. I'm going to try and keep this from rubbing on anything. Cut the end off. We did the same thing on the driver's side. Install the line, give it a pull. Snug down the air valves in the rear using an 11mm wrench. Do this on both sides. Using a jack, we're going to lift up on the rear axle and push it towards our airbag assemblies. If you're using a jack to do this, while you're jacking this up, keep an eye on your lift points and make sure they do not come off of your stands. Install the bolts through the airbag assembly plate. Install all four. Do the same thing on the other side. Install the bracket onto the bolts. We're going to have the slotted area pointing out towards the outside. Install the nuts onto the bottom of the bolts. Do the same thing on the back side. Using a 14mm socket, snug the nuts down. Do the same thing on the other side. Torque the nuts to 40 foot-pounds. Do the same thing on the back side and then the other assembly. With a jack placed under your differential, go ahead and remove that now. Use a block of wood or a rubber bushing so you don't mar up the rear diff. Inflate the airbags to 70 psi. With the airbags full, we're going to use some soapy water and spray our lines. Go around and spray all of the fittings and check for leaks. Once you can confirm you have no leaks in your system, install the tire caps onto your air valves. Install the wheel. Get the lug nuts started. Snug them down. Torque the lug nuts in a star pattern to 85 foot-pounds. And you're good to go.